Hello and welcome back for another Sheriff of Sodium video. As part of my constabulary duties, every now and again I have to fact check certain assertions that get made in debates or discussions about medical education. Not all the time, but from time to time I have to do this. And based on some observations over the past week or so, today is one of those times. Here's what I'm talking about. So, as you all know, I'm on social media. So, on Twitter or X or Threads or LinkedIn or whatever, every now and then I post data that are interesting to me and data that I hope will help others understand trends in medical training. So, over the past week, I posted about trends in the number of medical school applicants. And I posted about the program fill rate from the recent Pediatrics and Medical Specialties Fellowship match. So these are just regular bread and butter Sheriff of Sodium posts. And they were quite specifically posts that really had nothing to do with the number of residency positions available in the United States or how fast that number is growing. So I was a little bit perplexed when I scrolled through the replies and I saw lots of people commenting on those very things. And then, maybe because I interacted with those replies, I started seeing more primary content on my feed related to how we need more residency positions urgently because there are simply not enough and they're not growing at the same rate as medical school graduates. And if you follow me for a while, you know that neither of those things is true. And it's something that I commented on frequently in the past. And honestly, I used to think I'd done a pretty darn good job because I really hadn't heard much about that stuff for at least a year or two. So maybe this is all just some kind of Russian social media misinformation plot, with bots that are programmed to sow seeds of strife and discontent into the American medical education system, or maybe they're just trying to make my head explode. And if so, let me tell you, I bought it hook, line, and sinker because I decided that it was time to make a quick video. Anyhow, that's how we got here. So in this video, we're going to look at real data about the number of residency applicants and the number of residency positions. And I'll show you how there are more than enough residency positions for all U.S. medical students. And in fact, there hasn't been a better time to apply to residency in recent memory. But I'll also explain why it feels like neither of those things which are true, why it feels like neither of them should be true. And to save you a few minutes in the comments, I'm even going to take a few minutes to preempt some of the usual objections that I hear when I talk about this from people that think that I'm trying to pull the wool over their eyes or push for proposals that disadvantage them, because I'm not really trying to do either of those things. I'm here today as the fact police to protect you from misinformation and serve you with data, nothing more. So let's get right into it with some numbers from last year's NRMP match. Last year, there were just under 20,000 graduating fourth-year medical students from U.S. MD granting medical schools who applied for the match. And there were another just under 7,500 graduating students from USDO schools who also applied for the match. So in all, just over 27,000 fresh U.S. medical school graduates who are applying for residency positions. And how many PGY1 residency positions were there? 37,425. So there are enough residency positions for every graduating U.S. medical student, and there's still over 10,000 to spare. Now, obviously there are residency applicants who are not fourth-year medical students at U.S. MD and DO schools. Last year, there were over 13,000 international medical graduates who also entered the match. And of these, 37% were U.S. citizens who went to overseas medical schools, usually in the Caribbean, and 63% were non-U.S. citizen IMGs who completed medical school, usually in their country of origin. So when you include all match applicants, meaning the IMGs and any previously unmatched U.S. graduates, now we've got almost 43,000 applicants for those 37,425 positions. So now around 5,500 applicants are not going to get a position. In other words, if we're talking about just US MD and DO students, there are more than enough residency positions for everyone. If we're talking about all applicants, including international medical graduates, then there's not enough residency positions for everyone. This is a very important distinction when we're talking about policy, and that's what we're talking about here. It would make no sense to have a system in which the number of US medical students exceeded the number of US residency positions. because in lots of ways, taxpayer dollars heavily subsidize medical education with things from direct governmental subsidies to the schools themselves to federal access to student loans and need-based grants for financial aid for students, or even the tax breaks that schools receive for serving an educational mission. So, from a policy standpoint, if we are investing money in undergraduate medical education that wasn't possibly going to lead to more fully trained physicians because there weren't enough residency positions for all the graduates that we were supporting with our tax dollars, well, that would be wasteful and totally nonsensical. And sometimes I think these comments about how we don't have enough residency positions for everyone are intended to make ill-informed listeners believe and feel incensed that that's the kind of system that we have. But it's not. Let me show you some more data, and then I'm going to circle back to address some of the things that you may be thinking right now. This graphic shows the number of residency applicants. That's the red line, as well as the number of residency positions that are offered in the match. That's the blue line. So just like we learned a moment ago, when you consider all applicants, there are more of them than there are residency positions. So as you can see here, for the past 25 years, the red line is above the blue line because there's been more applicants than positions. But look at the gap between those lines. Because, like I said at the beginning of this talk, the other common piece of misinformation that I hear is some version of, but residency positions aren't growing at the same rate as medical school graduates. And that, if true, would also be a very bad policy. But it's not true. As you can see, the red line is higher than the blue line, but they are both moving upward in lockstep with each other. For the past 15 years or so, the gap between these two curves is pretty constant. There are lots of truthful reasons that you can use to argue for having more GME positions, but claiming that the natural growth in GME positions doesn't match the growth in applicants is not one of them. Moving on, I want to show you two more slides of truthful data, and then we'll talk about some of the implications of this. This graphic shows you the ratio of available PGY1 residency positions per applicant, and it goes back all the way to 1976, which is as far back as the public and RMP data goes. The yellow curve here shows you how many residency positions there were per applicant when you consider all applicants. And as you can see, there were a couple times back in the late 1970s and again in the late 1980s and early 1990s when there were actually more residency positions than there were residency applicants. Notice how that yellow line goes north of 1. That's the horizontal dashed line that I've got for you right here. But for the past 25 years, that line, it's wandered up and down a little bit, but it's been consistently below 1. Last year, there were only 0.87 residency positions available per all applicants. But this blue line up here, this shows you the ratio of available positions for graduating students of USMD schools, the so-called MD seniors. And as you can see, going back to the beginning of known time, there have always been more residency positions than there were MD seniors. Now, for most of the past 50 years, this blue curve is pretty flat, but notice the trend upward over the past decade. Last year, there were 1.9 residency positions available for every graduating MD student. 1.9. Let me be clear about the significance of that. In terms of the macroeconomics of the match, there has never been a better time to be a USMD student. Never before have there been so many residency positions offered to so few applicants. Some people have a hard time believing this. They don't want it to be true because, to be honest, it doesn't feel like it should be. So one frequent objection I get is that I'm trying to hide something, that I'm trying to hide the competition between MDs and DOs, and that actually, if you factor in the DO applicants, this ratio would be getting worse. Let me tell you, that's not true. I like this graphic because of the x-axis. It goes all the way back to the first year that the NRMP reported these statistics. So it gives you a sense of where we are now versus historical norms. But for most of its history, the NRMP did not keep detailed statistics on DO seniors. And actually, even if they had, they would have been not very informative and difficult to interpret because many DOs were not participating in the NRMP match. And that's because there was a separate AOA osteopathic match. But since 2016, there's been just one single match. And so here's what things look like if we zoom in on just the past 7 years. Here again, we're looking at the ratio of available positions per residency applicant. And just like before, I've got a blue line that shows MD seniors and a yellow line that shows that ratio for all applicants. But now we've also got a red line that combines MD and DO seniors. So back in 2016, there were 1.33 residency positions available for each graduating MD and DO student. And by last year, that ratio was up to 1.38. So once again, there's never been a better time in all of recorded match history to be a US MD or DO senior applying for residency positions in the NRMP match. And actually, even if we're talking about all applicants, the ratio of positions per applicant last year was 0.87, which, believe it or not, is actually the best ratio in the past 20 years. So let's discuss this, starting first with maybe the most obvious question. Why doesn't it feel that way? And the simple answer is applicants want the same thing. The kind of residency program that's appealing to one kind of applicant is also likely appealing to other similar applicants. And this is true at every stratum of the entire marketplace of residency programs. There are more MD seniors who want to match in neurosurgery or plastic surgery or dermatology or orthopedics than there are positions in those specialties. There are more DO seniors who want to be anesthesiologists than there are DO-friendly anesthesiology programs. Even in less competitive specialties, there's a lot more applicants who would like to train in internal medicine at the Brigham or UCSF, or in pediatrics at CHOP or Boston Children's than those programs could ever possibly take. There may not be that many US seniors who are interested in doing family medicine at programs outside of big medical centers, but don't worry because there's a whole group of international medical graduates or previously unmatched applicants for whom matching in a program like that would be a dream. The point is, there's extensive market segmentation in the universe of residency selection. There may be enough internal medicine residency positions for every US senior to have one and then some, but there aren't enough internal medicine residency positions of the kind that these applicants prefer. This graphic here gives you an idea of just how extensive the market segmentation is in a specialty like internal medicine. It comes from Tania Jenkins' excellent book, Doctor's Orders, The Making of Status Hierarchies in an Elite Profession. And the graphic here, what it's showing you is the percentage of USMDs in internal medicine residency programs. Now, in last year's match, around 40% of all internal medicine residency positions were filled by USMDs, and another 20% were filled by DOs, and the final 40% were filled by IMGs. So you might think that if we just picked an internal medicine residency program at random, we would see that on average 40% of the residents were USMDs or 40% were IMGs. Or at least you might think that if you weren't paying attention at all to me a minute ago when I was talking about market segmentation, because in fact, you'd be extremely unlikely to find a program with a distribution of residents that approximates the overall distribution in the specialty, because all of the MDs tend to end up at one type of program, and all of the IMGs tend to end up at another. So in this graphic, the light gray bars correspond to university-based programs. You know, the famous ones that are attached to giant academic medical centers. So around half of all of those programs are made up entirely, 100%, by US MD graduates. That's what this bar here is. In contrast, the dark gray bars, those show community internal medicine programs. So at these community hospitals, you can see that over half of them have residency programs that are exclusively composed of IMGs, not a single USMD. So the proportion of USMDs in internal medicine overall may be 40%, but if you just drew a program out of a hat at random, you'd be far more likely to find a program that had 100% MDs or 0% MDs than you would any number in between. The number of applicants that apply to a given residency program or a given type of residency program, it's an equilibrium quantity. Applicants assign different values to different residency programs or different residency specialties. And although everyone has their own personal story or reason for doing the things that they do, in the aggregate, applicants overall tend to apply to the most valuable type of program where they think they've got a chance to match. That's why at every stratum of the market, there are more applicants than positions, whether we're talking about Ivy League otolaryngology programs or community-based IMG-friendly psychiatry residencies. Let me move on to the next point of discussion, which this one is a common objection that I get when I point out that yes, contrary to what some self-interested people want you to believe, the number of residency positions is growing and it's growing steadily. And that objection is this. But isn't there a cap on residency programs? And this claim, it's based on something that's true, but the way people talk about it shows they don't know what they're talking about. Here's what's true. Back in 1997, as part of the Balanced Budget Act, Congress passed and President Clinton signed into law a provision that capped a certain type of federal funding that hospitals receive through Medicare for training residents. Specifically, the Balanced Budget Act limited direct GME payments to hospitals by capping at 1997 levels the total number of full-time equivalent residents that Medicare would support with direct GME payments. So these direct GME or DGME payments, they're subsidies that a hospital receives as a per resident amount. And this amount of money is, as the name suggests, it's supposed to help cover the direct costs of training residents. So those costs would be things like the resident's salary or benefits, or their program director's salary, or the administrative support that you need to have the program. But if you've watched my video on what resident physicians are worth, or if you are simply a reasonably observant citizen of the actual world in which we live, then you already know that residents are moneymakers for hospitals. Having residents usually increases the hospital throughput and it enables caring for higher acuity patients at a lower cost. So when you add residents, it's a financial winner for the hospital, even if Uncle Sam doesn't give you a DGME stipend. So to be clear, the 1997 Balanced Budget Act, it did not cap the number of residency positions. It did not say that you couldn't expand your residency program. It simply said that the government wasn't going to pay any more in DGME payments than they were paying for the number of residents that there were in 1997. So if you're a hospital, you are more than welcome to start a residency program or expand your complement of existing residents. You just have to make the financials work out yourself. And usually they do. So that's why I started the x-axis of this graphic in 1997, so that I could come back to you now and point out how, in the first few years after the Balanced Budget Act, the growth in residency positions was pretty flat. But after the first 8 or 10 years, growth picked back up and it's been steady ever since, even without any additional DGME subsidy. All right, moving on to another objection, which comes up when I point out, like I did at the beginning, that we actually have more than enough residency positions for every U.S. medical graduate. And that objection is some version of, well, yeah, but what about the IMGs? Why don't you care about IMGs? And what I want to communicate clearly is I do. I do care about IMGs. We are very fortunate in the United States to be able to draw some of the best and brightest doctors from around the world to practice here. And I want IMGs to be fairly evaluated in residency selection. And I think if you follow me, you've seen me comment on those things fairly frequently. The reason that I emphasize the number of US graduates relative to the number of residency positions is the point that I made earlier about policy. As a matter of policy, we have to have more residency positions than we do medical school graduates. And we do. Um, I'm not making that point because I don't think IMGs deserve residency positions. Actually, there's a very strong argument to make that having a system that depends on IMGs not only benefits US medical practice by letting some of the smartest doctors from around the world work here, but it actually also elevates the quality of US medical school applicants. And if that's something that you've never thought about before, then let me explain. I want you to imagine a world in which we have exactly as many residency positions as we do US medical school graduates. Now, if you think about this imaginary world very superficially, it might sound pretty good. I mean, I'm sure it doesn't sound good if you're an IMG because in this imaginary system, we wouldn't need any IMGs. But in terms of the efficiency of the system, I mean, this system would be 100% efficient, right? Because every single US graduate is going to have a residency position. There won't be any position that goes unfilled or any graduate that goes unmatched. But if you think about this system for more than a second or two, you start to realize it wouldn't be a very good system because it would remove the element of choice for many medical school graduates. I mean, everybody might get a residency position, but how many people are going to get the position that they really want? I want to be a radiologist. Sorry, bud. Radiology's closed. Only thing I got left is family medicine in the Midwest. So I'm gonna go ahead and put you there. Well, I want to be an orthopedic surgeon. Sorry. But I do have some emergency medicine spots at a new HCA hospital in Florida. How about that? I want to stay on the West Coast. Well, we had a lot of people that said that this year, but I do still need some internal medicine residents in the Bronx. I mean, you can imagine there would be so much less freedom in this kind of market. So what's that going to do to the quality of medical school applicants in the long run? It should be obvious it's going to erode the quality significantly. I mean, would medicine still be a career that attracted the United States best and brightest if applicants knew that they were just going to be assigned a position at the end of medical school? I don't think so. So, from a completely selfish, US centered perspective, having a system that relies on IMGs to fill 30% or so of positions, that kind of system, it provides freedom in the market that helps keep medicine as an appealing career for the best American students. Allow me to move on to a somewhat related objection, which is, well, why can't we just have a residency position for everyone? I mean, here I am telling you that we have enough for US medical graduates, but I admitted that we don't have enough for every applicant, and that's not fair, right? This is a sweet thought that I think comes from a good place because anyone who is involved in residency selection should see that there's a certain cruelty that's inherent in this whole process. But it's not a serious idea or a proposal that any serious person would make. I'm going to try to be brief, but I'll tell you, I hear this enough that I think I need to take just a minute to ask anyone who doesn't immediately see the flaw in this plan to just think through what's going to happen. So come with me on a brief journey of imagination. The first year that you give everyone a residency position, I guess it works out okay. I mean, we've still got to come up with 5,500 new residency positions all of a sudden, and that's not going to be easy. And who's to say what the educational quality is going to be, or whether those new positions that suddenly appear are going to be the type of positions that applicants actually want? But set that aside for a moment, and let's think on to what's going to happen in year two, and year three, and year four, and every year thereafter. If you guarantee a residency position to everyone who applies, the first thing that's going to happen is that a lot more people are going to apply. And you all ought to realize that the potential supply of residency applicants from around the world is immense and horizonless. New medical schools will be created because why not? Their graduates are guaranteed a residency position if they apply. So pretty soon, we're going to have a medical school in every strip mall in the Caribbean. The only appropriate standard for determining the number of residency positions that we should have is the number of future physicians we need. Now, that's not the standard we use, by the way. It's the standard we should use, but it's not the one we actually use. Regardless, there is absolutely no credible argument that can be made that we should increase the number of residency positions just to accommodate the number of applicants. Now, there's a more reasonable version of this that doesn't ask for a guaranteed residency position for all applicants, but argues that since everyone knows we have a physician shortage, we all know that, right? So on account of that, we just need more residency positions, more than what we have. We just need more. Now, this is something that deserves more of a detailed handling than I have time to give it now, but I promise I'm going to come back to it at some point in the future. So I guess this is a good place in the video to say, if you haven't already subscribed to this channel, please take a second and do that now so that you won't miss it when I do come back to this. Moving on, I do want to discuss one final point that frequently comes up when I'm discussing these data, and that's this. Why can't we have a US first residency selection system? That is, why can't we allocate residency positions to US citizens first, then have non-US citizens match into whatever's left over? Often this question comes from an applicant who's a US citizen but has chosen to go to medical school in the Caribbean, and then they'll point to medical training systems in other countries that often work in this very way, where citizens of that country are prioritized and then the leftover positions are distributed among others. But there are at least two big reasons why this will not work. The first is it's probably not legal. At the very least, any kind of policy like this would be subject to legal challenges. All this gets complicated, but a discriminatory program that restricts the ability of certain classes of people to work would have to be very carefully crafted to be immune to challenges over the Equal Protection Clause of the Constitution, the due process rights of those adversely affected, concerns about discrimination in the workplace or employment law, or even negative impacts on the beneficiaries, meaning Medicare and Medicaid patients. Obviously, I'm not a lawyer, and I'm not in a position to judge the merits of any counterargument about such and such element of law related to any of these issues. So if you disagree with me, I'm simply going to point you to the historical record. Back in the 1990s, COGME, the Council on Graduate Medical Education, which is the body whose purpose is to advise Congress on issues related to residency training, COGME was asked to consider this issue, and they concluded that the potential legal challenges to policies similar to this were serious and credible. Here's a quote from their report. Courts are likely to view negatively any blanket provision prohibiting IMGs from practicing medicine in the United States. Sufficient and well-accepted mechanisms to gauge and evaluate preparedness for GME, for judging competence, and for control of quality exist in the United States, so no argument could be made that GME restrictions relate to a reduction in the clinically incompetent. A blanket provision solely to control supply is not likely to be viewed favorably, end quote. So again, I'm not a constitutional law expert, but in matter of fact, this is what a group of learned congressional advisors concluded when they were asked to consider this issue. And I guess I should say that the reason they were considering it was because at the time there was concern that we were training too many physicians. And so the solution they recommended was the very one that got implemented, which was to cap DGME payments, so that at least hospitals didn't have an incentive to just keep adding residents just to keep getting free money from the government. Now, even if you think I'm still wrong, that the legal concerns are overblown, there is still a second reason why a policy like this is very, very unlikely to occur. And that's because Congress would never pass it. And I say that not because I have some political crystal ball about what's going to happen with Donald Trump or Republicans or Democrats or anything else. I say that because politicians of any type, they like one thing more than anything else, and that's getting reelected. And the way you get reelected is by keeping your constituents happy and not by doing things that mobilize large and powerful entities against you. And so you ought to recognize that a US first residency selection system, there are a lot of powerful entities that would not want this because of what it might mean for their own industries. So here you need to look beyond residency training and recognize that immigrants and highly skilled visa workers are the lifeblood of powerful industries like tech and pharma. Google and Meta, they do not want a US citizen first policy. And neither does Merck or Johnson and Johnson. Even industries like tourism depend on non-citizens for their business model. And you do not want to get on the wrong side of Disney or the Las Vegas resorts. And then you got to think of the universities who depend on scientists or faculty from overseas. And many of those universities, by the way, are affiliated with hospitals that would be implementing this US citizen first policy. Folks, you got to remember that all these companies that we're talking about, they're major employers, and they throw around a ton of political donations and lobbying muscle. They would perceive a major threat from a US citizen first residency training legislation, and they would work hard to ensure that it never reached the floors of Congress. And with that, I'm going to bring this episode of the Fact Police to a close. I will release you all on your own recognizance and not strain the metaphor any further. Thanks for listening.